Okay, let's go ahead and get started. It's close enough. Welcome everyone to Open Show Los Angeles. This is our number 66 event. So we've done it a few times. So welcome and thank you for your time. We are going to be happy to share three presenters today with you, and Brian, Cassandra, and Scott. Before that, I'll just talk a little bit about Open Show. Some of you already know who we are, but I see some new faces, so I thought it would be good to talk a little bit about Open Show, Los Angeles, and so on. Um, let me, okay, here we go. So Open Show is actually a global organization uh, that has multiple local chapters. These are this is an old slide, but you can get a sense of all the countries around the world that has an open show chapter. So the open show started in San Francisco about 11, 12 years ago, and Los Angeles is number two, started way back then. So we are actually going into our 11th year, uh, sharing work by photographers and visual artists. So we're happy to be able to do that. So you can tell some of these cities, some of these chapters are more active than others. So some are new and so on. And we do have just FYI, we have a open show in San Diego, and we have open show in Sacramento, and also we have one near to us. They call themselves East Los Angeles, Pasadena, or Open Soul Pasadena. So we do have a few of them that are close by, close to us. Um, and what we do is we curate bi-monthly artist talks, like every 2 months or so. We have an event to get photographers' work seen. And generally, in the past anyway, we meet in person, usually in galleries and studios and such. But in the last 2 years, as you know, we're moved on to Zoom. At some point, I hope to go back to in person and maybe a hybrid model. Um, One of the benefit of using Zoom is that we're able to present folks from pretty much anywhere. Scott, for example, is in Washington, D.C., so he's not local in Los Angeles, but he's here with us. And likewise with Brian, who's in San Diego. So that's one benefit. And then we have had presenters from Australia, for example. So they're all over. Anyway, we'll continue doing the open show bit to get really good work seen by others. And just a quick intro, openshowla.com is our website right there. And then you can go to the website and you can see upcoming events, and you can see our next call of entry, for people for our next set of presenters. You can go there and look. And another intro, this is me, Richard S. Chow, and Jonas Yip, he's here. You can wave your hand. Jonas, we both run the Open Show LA, and Jonas been around for since the beginning. So, and today we're going to be talking to Scott, Brian, and Cassandra. So, in terms of some logistics, um, if you have any questions, I hope you do, and please be generous, and you can ask any questions you like, and you can put them at the chat window. Okay, you click on chat, and you can key in your questions there, and we can make sure to cover them. And and then we have a Q&A after each presenter, a short one, and then we have a longer Q&A at the end when everybody's done. Okay, so if you like, you can leave your video on, and but you can mute yourself, so that we don't get any extra noise. Okay. Final note is that um, we are recording this session. So just so that you know that this will be recorded. Okay. Thank you. All right. Are there any questions so far at this point? If not, um, we can start the open show. Okay, our first presenter today would be Brian. Brian currently lives in San Diego, and he started his photographic journey about 12 years ago. And he has shown in many galleries and gotten awards and such. But I went and looked at his portfolio. I can tell, right? One can tell that he has playfulness in those images. So I think his intention is quite certainly, serious and focused on telling the story. So please take a look at some of his other work besides the one that he is showing us today. And he's also a musician. What is it? Irish punk band?
Yes, an Irish
Ah,
punk band.
yes. And then he's also an Open Show LA alumni because he has shown with us many years ago. I forgot how long ago, but
It was a while.
yeah, it's been a while. So welcome back, and
Thank you.
I'm happy to show his work, which is quite unique and different. So go ahead, Brian.
All right. You'll need to stop sharing your screen.
That's right.
All right. And let me go ahead and share mine. Um, I think Richard did a pretty good job of introducing me. I did live in LA for 15 years, so I met a lot of the people in the photo community up in LA when I lived up there. But my wife and I moved back down to San Diego about 4 years ago, and um, I am now working on being semi-retired. When I was in LA, I worked a very stressful corporate job. Now I'm just doing part-time work and trying to focus my time on my art practice. In fact, I've gotten to a point now when people ask me what I do, I tell them that I'm an artist and a musician, which for me, after all these years of being in the corporate world and so on, is a really big step. Um, so let me jump into the work here. The project is called Words Leak Out, and that is a riff on a quote from William Burroughs, where he said, "When you cut into the present, the future leaks out." You may be familiar with the fact that William Burroughs, among others, was a big proponent of using cut ups in his writing, where he would cut up various other pieces of writing and reassemble them to find new text and new meaning. So my work sort of builds on that technique. Um, it kind of started in a couple of ways. It started when my mother passed away a few years ago, and she left behind many big plastic bins of photographs. She was an avid photographer, but she was also not a terribly good photographer. There are very few photographs in that grouping, in that those bins that are particularly notable. Some of them are travel photographs, some of them are family photographs. Many of them are photographs of the San Diego Zoo. She used to go to the San Diego Zoo and walk around several times a week back in the 80s and 90s. And I would say I've got thousands of photographs of animals in the San Diego Zoo. Um, so as I was going through these and sorting through them, um, I kept thinking, what what can I do with these photographs from a artistic perspective, working essentially with found photographs. And I remembered back to my college days when I was playing around with cut-ups in the style of William Burroughs and Brian Geisen. And and then somewhere along the line, I discovered the notion of blackout poetry, which is basically the idea of blacking out portions of a book page and leaving only the words that you want to be in your poem. And I got the idea of combining the two, of using the photograph to obscure the book page and then cutting these little windows out for the text that I wanted to reveal. And it sort of started as a what if kind of a thing. It started out of curiosity. Can I do this and pull it off and make it work? And so I tried a couple and I felt good about it. In fact, a lot of my work is sort of driven by curiosity. I kind of call it, it's a very boyish curiosity in a lot of ways. When I was a young boy, it probably would have centered around the question, what would happen if I set this thing on fire? But nowadays, I don't set quite as many things on fire. Um, so, so I tried this, and I felt pretty good about it, and I worked with it. And then at some point, I noticed that the poems that, that really worked best with a photograph were short. And that led me to haiku. And then that led me to the history of Japanese short form poetry. And I kind of went down that rabbit hole researching and reading and found out about tanka and renga and hoku and haikai and senryu and haiga. Um, in my artist statement, I stopped short of saying that my work is any one of those things, because I'm really kind of doing something different. There are a number of poems here that follow what I learned in grade school as the format of a haiku, which is 5, 7, and 5 syllables. But in terms of traditional haiku, there are very few um, that really have the appropriate subject matter and structure of content to be called haiku. But the interesting thing is that there's a variant of haiku called haiga, which involves pairing a image with a haiku or a short form poem. And originally, this was usually done by the poet himself, and both the image and the poem were produced in an individual piece, the with a brush. The poet would do the calligraphy and the small painting together. Um, so there's a long tradition of pairing this kind of short form poetry with imagery. In fact, it goes back much further than the Japanese traditions. The Japanese really borrowed it from the Chinese. Um, and so the project continues to evolve. It's really an interesting process because I have a big stack of old books. I have a big box of images that I've already gone through, and I've chosen all the ones that are portrait orientation. Um, And so when I sit down to do this, as you can see in the little video, I'm kind of working back and forth between the images and the pages, and I'm looking for interesting words. And I'm trying really hard not to start reading the pages, but just kind of scanning them for words that I can use. And it's really kind of a fascinating process to me. It's a little bit addictive, actually. Um, it's like doing a puzzle, like a crossword or something like that. But in the end, you have this nice, one of a kind, original piece of work that hopefully has some meaning to it. Um, and so that's kind of what I've been doing. One of the nice things about it during the pandemic was I was spending a lot of time in front of computer screens on Zoom. I suspect we all were, and I wanted to do something that was different than that, something with my hands, something that involved paper and cutting things and, you know, and so on. And so this really satisfied that need for me. As far as where it's going to go from here, um, I'd like to get some of these pieces published in some literary magazines. I've had a couple of these included in juried exhibitions in the photo world, but I haven't really explored the literary world, which is a completely different world. The little bit of investigation that I've done, the people in the literary world are much more concerned about the right of first publication. They won't even look at anything that's been included in another show or another publication. So I've been sort of keeping the most recent ones back, not putting them on my website, not putting them on social media, so that I have something that I can submit to literary magazines. Um, as far as exhibition, uh, there's a local bookstore here in San Diego called Verbatim that it's a really cool used bookstore, and they feature art from local artists. So I'd like to get some of these works in there. And um, and then I have a follow-on idea for this type of work that would have an interactive kind of installation component that would work really well in a library. Um, so I'm talking to some of the people who are librarians in my life, um, trying to get an idea of whether or not my idea will really fly, or whether it will just make all the librarians angry with me. Um, and eventually, it might be nice to put some of these in a book. Um, this body of work is different for me than a lot of my work in that it doesn't, other than the technique, it doesn't really have a unified theme. Um, I see it at this point more as a practice that I'll probably be hopefully making these for the rest of my life, and just see where it goes. And each individual piece then, becomes a new adventure, as it were. So this is what I've been focusing on for probably about the last 6 months. I've done a lot of reading of Japanese haiku. I've done a lot of reading of William Burroughs and Brian Geisen, because I like to understand the background of the work that I'm doing and where my work kind of fits in the overall um, artistic scheme of things. So that's pretty much what I've got. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, feel free to key in your questions in the chat window, and we'll make sure to cover them. And oh, John has a question, and John asks, "Do the words relate to your personal life, Brian?"
Um, Sometimes I'll just say sometimes I never go into this process thinking, oh, I want to write a poem about something. It's really kind of an open-ended process where the words that are on the page suggest the ideas to me. And it could be that they relate to my personal life. It could be that they don't, that they relate just to an idea or, something like that. That's really kind of what's exciting about it. The surrealists were really into this sort of these sorts of techniques of cut ups and Tristan Zara once caused a supposed riot by writing poetry by pulling words out of a hat.
Mhm.
Um, the surrealists really see this type of technique as a way to sort of get in touch with your subconscious. And I don't know if that's true or not, but it is definitely sometimes the case that I am surprised or and hopefully delighted by the things that I create and or discover. One could look at it from a different point of view and say, oh, these little poems are hiding on that page someplace, and it's my job to find them. Um, the other thing that I've done, and I'll skip forward here on the slideshow a little bit, is the way I present these is in a shadow box um, with these little map pins. I really like the physicality of the old pages. I prefer to work with older books that have sort of a yellowed page. I prefer to tear them out because I like the torn um, page image. And there's something just sort of special about the individual physical object that I try and enhance that by presenting them the way that I do.
Thank you, Brian. That was really an interesting way to look at it, because one of the first thing that comes to my mind was that this is kind of photo-based art in a way,
Mm-hmm.
because it is, like you said earlier, is a one of one, right? It's an original piece of work or piece of art. So that's sort of, it has value, right? Because of the fact that it's one of one,
Mm-hmm.
So um, uh,
Well, I will confess that my mom, as frugal as she was, would always get the free double prints. So many of these prints I have two of.
uh,
I haven't yet done two poems using the same print.
okay.
Um, but there's also an interesting dynamic. You mentioned the one of one notion. There's an interesting dynamic when I'm composing something or putting something together because I know that once I make that commitment and I cut into that um, image that and glue them together, that those two are spent. If a better poem came along, too bad. I have to make a commitment. I can't get held up by thinking, oh, well, I really like this photograph. Maybe I should save it for a better poem. Or, I mean, it's really kind of an interesting dynamic.
It is. It's like making art that sometimes a serendipity is part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
It's like making a chemigram, right, in a dark room, because you
Mm-hmm.
never know what you're gonna get until you actually, pour whatever chemical that you use
Mm-hmm.
on a, on a silver gelatin, and then something came out, and you go, "Wow, this is cool," or "No, this is not so cool." But you see, that's just part of the process, part of the art making. So there's a bunch of questions here. Let me just get to a couple, and then maybe we'll get the rest at the end. Okay, Brian. So Nancy said, "Are you still using your mom's photos?"
Yes, I am still using my mom's photos. If you saw the box of photos that showed in the video, those are all my mother's photos. And that's just a small fraction of the photos that she has. Those are the ones that are portrait orientation, because that's what really works for this treatment. Although now that people know that I'm doing this work, I have people giving me photos. Someone will say, oh, my friend sadly just passed away and they left me all their photos and I really don't want them. Do you want them? And to my wife's dismay, I often say yes. So I don't imagine that I will always be using my mother's photographs, but there are just so many of them that it's a pretty good source at this point. I don't feel like the fact that they're my mother's photographs are necessarily significant to the work. It's just a, a large cache of materials that I have available to me.
Right. Yeah, it sort of matched because, you know, the old the old yellow pages, right, of the book, and then old pictures. So,
Mhm.
all right, one last question, and then we can cover the rest later.
Okay.
And that's from Jonas. Uh, Along with the one of one concept, are you planning to do edition prints or just originals?
I am planning to do edition prints. The two that I had in juried exhibitions were edition to prints, partly because I felt a little bit reluctant to ship the originals because they're a little bit fragile.
Yeah.
Um, at some point, I'll probably have to solve that problem, but yeah, I'll probably do editioned prints as well, but
Okay.
most likely in that the same sort of 8 by 10 size. I don't think they necessarily work much larger. I mean, there's a certain intimacy to them at that size.
Yeah, yeah, totally agreed. Okay, we have a couple from Cassandra and John, but we'll cover them at the end, so I won't forget. I
Okay.
want to make sure that we get to others' presentation. All right. So thank you,
You're
Brian.
welcome.
That was very insightful. Thank you so much. Our next presenter, Cassandra, and she is in Washington, well, Washington State, right up north. Yep. And she recently graduated. What, last month?
Yeah, about a month ago.
Yeah, in the Bachelor of Fine Arts last month. So congratulations.
Thank
And
you.
her work is quite unique, and I think her work speaks to nature and families. And then she'll be sharing her work today, entitled "Family Ties." And guess what? Just fresh out of college, she already had a solo show. with this work, with the family ties work in Washington. So, and with no further ado, Cassandra, we would like to see your work and hear your stories.
Perfect. All right. Um, okay, can everybody see this?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So, hi everybody, I'm Cassandra. And as it was mentioned, I am a recent graduate from Central Washington University. I graduated with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Studio Art, and I am from Washington State. So a lot of my work um, experiments with how photographic processes intertwine with the ideas of how one views family, nature, and life in general. Today, I'm presenting my most recent work, which was created for my BFA senior exhibition. This body of work is titled Family Ties and will include pieces from the project's Family Ties and Momentary Reflections. Both of these projects came to be because for the past few years, I have been thinking about my childhood and the people and spaces that I was surrounded by. I began to wonder if the way I was raised had a bigger traumatic impact than I initially realized. I had a unique family dynamic growing up. I was raised by my mother, my aunt, and my grandmother, three very strong and independent women. I did not know my father. One day I was looking through old family photo albums when I began thinking about the people in the images. In the past, I'd struggled to picture my family members as anything other than their titles. For example, my mom was only seen as my mom. I didn't think of her as a separate being with her own life. Um, so as I was flipping through these albums, I started to wonder who these people really were. What did they think and how did they identify themselves in that time? And then I began to try and connect who these people were to who I am today. So this is what began the idea for the project Family Ties. To begin the process of creating these works, I compiled dozens of family photos that I felt most connected to. The images I chose consisted of a single person, not a group. I wanted to feel a one-on-one connection with the person in the photo. After narrowing down my selection of images to use, I would recreate each image with myself as the subject. I wore similar clothes, had my hair in the same style, and positioned my body in the same way as my family members had. I would then photograph myself in the same manner and combine my photo and the family photo together. Through the use of repetition and space, I would create a new image that represented the relationships of the subjects. Once the images were combined, I would then print them onto linen and use red thread to highlight similarities or draw attention to a certain area. I used an alternative photographic process called liquid light emulsion to print photos onto various objects and materials. I was first introduced to the idea of alternative processes at the end of 2019. I instantly fell in love with the idea of using unique methods to transfer photos onto different materials. Liquid light emulsion is a glue-like substance that you paint onto a surface, and it makes that surface light sensitive, which then allows you to print on that surface as though it was photo paper in the darkroom. This project has gone through many stages since I first started in 2020. In the beginning, I wanted each work to be framed by an embroidery hoop. However, after receiving feedback, I realized that the embroidery hoop was unnecessary and it constricted the image. Moving forward, I began experimenting with different fabrics, shapes, and methods of destruction. Some experiments I found to be successful, such as fraying the edges of the fabric. Others I was not so fond of. I found that some fabrics created texture that was intriguing and enhanced the image, while other fabrics didn't render the image at all. After several months of work, I felt that the pieces weren't reaching their full potential. I took some time away and came back to Family Ties towards the end of 2021. I continued to think about how I could further the project and turn it into a solid body of work. I had many more discussions with my professors and peers about moving these images to 3D works. When I returned to this project, I knew that these works needed to become sculptural forms, and I needed to break out of my 2D frame of mind. I began scouring thrift stores for household items that reminded me of my family members and the feelings of home. I knew that if these images were going to exist as photographic sculptures, they had to be representative of the memories I have of my childhood. Once I began this move to 3D objects, I realized I didn't need to overlay myself in every image. Depending on what the object was, I took into consideration if I even needed to have myself in the photo at all to get the message across. I found that in some works, using myself was necessary to point out similarities. However, not every piece required this examination. These objects that I created are delicate both in their shapes and in their relationships. They represent many of this, or, oh, sorry. They are delicate both in their shapes and in the relationships they represent. Many of the surfaces are marred by rips, scratches, or dents in response to the feelings that arise from my thoughts of a certain person or memory. My use of materials such as fabric, ceramic, and glass relate to the emotions I have about the imagery printed on them. This piece is titled Table Settings. It features 3 plates with imagery of my mother, myself, and my father. Using plates in this way allowed me to show my family dynamic. Whenever I think of families together, I picture a dinner table because that is where everyone gathers at the end of the day. For this project, I also created several dolls of myself at different ages. Most range from the ages of 3 to 10. I wanted these to have a childlike innocence to them, just as I do in the imagery. These dolls are filled with cotton stuffing and filled with rocks at the bottom. This interplay between materials represents the way that children are light and free. However, as you grow up, responsibility becomes heavier and starts to weigh you down. Okay, so I'm going to move on to my other project that was included in my show, and this is called Momentary Reflections. This project began towards the end of last year when I went home to spend Thanksgiving with my family. Dinner was held at my grandmother's house where I grew up. As I was waiting for the celebration to start, I began to notice all of these objects that I remembered from my childhood. Even though it had been over 10 years since I lived in that house, everything seemed to be the same, as if nothing had really changed. I thought this was quite special, and I began documenting these rooms and objects I remembered seeing as a child. Going from room to room, documenting everything I had a memory of, became a mindful task, reflecting on all the years I spent in that house. In a single day, I photographed as much of my grandma's house as I could, without even knowing what I was going to do with these photos. It just became a reprise from the stress of adult life. After returning to school, I flipped through the images I had created and found that each time I looked at them, I felt a deep sense of peace and healing, which was similar to the feelings I was trying to achieve through my Family Ties project. I thought these 2 projects would complement each other well and bring together the ideas of trauma and healing. As I'm quite enthralled with using alternative processes, momentary reflections didn't feel right as straight prints. I felt the need to embody the idea of the past and of memory. I chose to use the Van Dyke process for these images as it creates a sepia tone image. Using this method allows me to have a physical hand in how the image is presented on the surface of the paper, which in turn allows me to delve deeper into these memories and highlight what is important. And I've included a few images from my BFA exhibition, which was held in February. I thought including these images would help give an idea of how these pieces interacted in the gallery. I only used a few dolls in the space and had them stacked in this way on a pedestal to engage the space and dissect this notion of play. To display the Van Dyke pieces, I clustered them together in groups of 2 or 3 as a way to create this idea of home and comfort. I used T-pins to hang the Van Dyke pieces, and I brought them off the wall slightly to show the fragility of the paper and create dimensionality in the works. The plates were a bit more difficult to display. I went back and forth with the idea of using a dinner table rather than pedestals, but a table felt like it would be out of place in the gallery. The pedestals allowed me to use this idea of hierarchy and distance to further the separation between me and my father. It was vital to have his broken plate low to the ground and set apart from my mother's plate and mine. And that is all I have for my presentation. I just wanted to thank you guys for listening and thank Open Show for the chance to present. Are there any questions about any of this work at all?
Yeah, feel free to key in your comments or questions there in the chat window. I have a question, Kassandra, in the meantime, while folks are, thinking about their questions, and that is, are you going to continue this series, or is there like some point in time that you want to say, oh, this is completed, done?
I think I want to continue this. The issue though is that now that I'm out of school, I don't have access to a darkroom. So really the challenge will be finding where I can do this if there are some local dark rooms that I can use. But I don't feel like this is finished. I feel like there's a lot more that I could be doing to expand both of these projects.
Yeah, that's great. Congratulations that you already have a show with all those unique images. I mean, image pieces, I should say. So
yes, thank you.
Yeah, and let's see. I'm trying to log back on my PC, so I'm on my cell phone now. Jonas, okay. Can you tell us more about how your selections and the media explore the trauma you experienced?
Yeah, of course. So I didn't go too in depth about the relationships, but as I said earlier, I didn't really know my father. So as I was flipping through all of these photo albums, I would see pictures of him as he was younger and before I was born. And I just kind of wondered who he was. So that was really part of the Family Ties project, was I wanted to kind of impersonate these people that I was from these family photos. So that's why I would put on clothes that were similar and just see if I could kind of get in that same brain space that they were in. And that just doing that was kind of like therapeutic, and it helped me kind of realize that even if you are a parent, you're still your own person. It helped me kind of realize that he was his own person, even though he wasn't there and I didn't know him, he still existed. And it kind of helped me realize that I'm okay without having him in my life. So that was just kind of how I worked through, I guess, the trauma of not growing up with him around.
Recording in progress.
Yeah, let me, now I'm back. I have to reboot my computer. Crazy, isn't it? Anyway, Kassandra, I missed actually a couple minutes. I don't know whether you have asked your mom or your aunt for some input because you don't know your dad. So I was wondering if this is too personal, then that's okay.
No, it's totally okay. I've asked them before. I've asked my mom about it, and she's shared as much as she knows. And there was a period of time where I actually did get to meet my dad, and we interacted. And I realized that, I didn't know if I needed his kind of relationship in my life. But they've also given me input on the work itself, which is very personal to them as well, because they are featured in it. And they just thought it was really good even for them to see it and see the trauma and things that I've worked through, and see that I'm at a better place now with how our family has turned out. So
oops, I guess maybe we lost Richard for a second. So we have a message from Mimi.
Oh, I'm on mute.
Oh, are you there?
Yeah, I'm back now. I was on mute. Yeah, I was just saying that Cassandra, yeah, this is this series is very personal in nature, so I applaud you for being courageous. And there's a comment from Amy, uh, who said that thank you for sharing this with us. Your work is inspiring.
Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah. And then anything else? All right, let me just take a look here. All right, we can actually might have a little bit more dialogue at the end, Cassandra. So,
No
all right,
worries.
thank you so much
Thank you.
for that. It's really insightful there. All right, our final home runs presenter Scott is here with us, and he's been taking photographs for a long time, and he does documentary, portraits, travel, and street photography as well. So he's sharing his work today that he captured on his trip to Iceland. So that should be quite interesting to look at and hear the backstories. And wanted to mention that one of the photographs from his series was recently awarded as a finalist in the Lucy Foundation open call. You know, Lucy Foundation, they put up a competition called IPA, International Photography Awards. So that's a pretty wide open um, um, global entry from a lot of people. So congratulations, Scott, for being a finalist in the lifestyle category. So congratulations. So um, with that, Scott, take it away.
Great. Thanks very much, Richard. I'll try and share my screen here. Can everybody see that? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Great. First I want to thank Open Show LA, Richard and Jonas for creating this wonderful forum and inviting me to share my work. And I'm really thrilled to share the stage with Cassandra and Brian as well. Fabulous work. So I'll introduce myself and then jump into the slideshow around the ring. I'm a photographer based in Washington, D.C., but I've got a day job as an attorney, like most people living in D.C., and also recently joined the board of PhotoWorks at Glen Echo. I'll give a little shout out to PhotoWorks. PhotoWorks is a hub for the photographic community in the D.C. area. Its mission is to bring photographers together for classes. They've got a great darkroom there, so they do the darkroom classes, gallery shows, and other community events. And it's also located in a national park in Glen Echo. So it's a beautiful location. So if anybody on this Zoom call gets to the DC area, look me up. I'd love to give you a tour of the place. I actually started my photographic journey at PhotoWorks about 20 years ago. Since then, I've been focusing mainly on black and white photography. I'd say it's somewhere between documentary and street photography, but it's really, my subject matter is really pretty eclectic. I dabble in abstract photography, recently been exploring some digital and color photography as well. So it's eclectic, but I would say my approach is pretty straightforward and intuitive. I like to say I search for images that resonate, for moments of synchronicity in everyday life. Before I became an attorney, I actually studied philosophy, and I have a master's in philosophy, and was very influenced by the writings of Carl Jung. So I view a lot of my photography through that Jungian lens, and actually as kind of a Jungian exercise in synchronicity. I think this approach typically relies a lot on unconscious triggers, and therefore I view my photographs, that they're often not merely documentary. Rather, I think they a lot of times it can be highly symbolic, kind of like fragments of dreams, messages from the unconscious. I know it sounds a little out there, but that is how I look at a lot of photography. And I like to say, for me, the essence of photography is capturing an image that resonates and then over the course of months or years, figuring out why. I guess that's probably a fancy way of saying when I've got issues, I work them out with my camera a lot of times. So that's enough about me. I'm going to talk about Around the Ring now, and I'm going to run through the photos once fairly quickly, and then come back and circle back and just discuss a few of them in more detail. So Around the Ring documents my first trip out of the country, and actually my first trip anywhere after about 18 months of pretty significant lockdown during the COVID-19 pandemic. My wife and I traveled to Iceland in the summer of 2021, which is just as the first wave was starting to subside and before the Delta strain kind of surged out of control later that summer. Iceland had always been on my bucket list, and it was one of the first countries to open up to US tourists. So we thought we would take our chances and go visit. So we flew there. You have to take a COVID test when you first get there, which we did. But once you get a negative result, which we did fairly quickly, it was like we stepped back into 2019. There was very low rates of COVID in Iceland. And so for the entirety of the trip, it was no masks, no travel restrictions, no avoiding restaurants. It was like a little island of normality. So our plan was to start in Reykjavik and drive the Ring Road. And for those who don't know what that is, the Ring Road is the main highway in Iceland that traverses the circumference of the entire island. I think it's traditional to drive it in a clockwise manner, which is what we did. And we ended up circling the island in about 12 days. And so hence, that's the reason I call it Around the Ring, because it documents this trip around the Ring Road. Iceland, I had high expectations, but I gotta say it exceeded those expectations in almost every way. I personally love road trips, but I hate interstate highways, and so I'm always looking for a back road. I'd actually rather drive longer if I'm on a back road, if it means I can avoid the traffic and have some nice scenery. And so I was thrilled to find out that the Ring Road was really the quintessential back road trip. Even though it's technically a highway, it's nothing like the 405 for you LA people. It's like no interstate highway I've seen in the US. Really, in reality, what it is a 2-lane country road that's not even paved in some parts. And I was surprised to find it's virtually unused as you get away from the cities. There really were stretches of the Ring Road where we didn't see another car for what seemed like hours. And, that actually was, I think, one of my favorite parts of the trip was driving on some, dusty, unused part of the road through some epic, otherworldly landscape, totally alone, not another car or person in sight, and feeling like we had, this entire unbelievable panorama to ourselves. I think the biggest risk on the Ring Road is not hitting another car, because there really weren't that many, but it's just driving off the road as you're staring at the unbelievable scenery. So, I would say it honestly was probably the best trip of my life. I couldn't tell whether that was because it was the first one that I took since the pandemic, or whether Iceland really was that amazing, but I think it was probably a little bit of both. In any event, I loved it so much that I actually went back for a second time a month later. As some of you may know, one of the volcanoes there was actively erupting. I don't know whether it still is or not, but at the time it was. And we unfortunately were not able to see it on our first trip because of bad weather, which is one of the risks of going to Iceland. And I became so obsessed with seeing it that I actually went back specifically to see it. And I got to say, it did not disappoint. It was pretty epic. So I said the series was named Around the Ring Road because it documents my trip around the ring road, but there's really another reason for that as well. And that is because it's intended to evoke the nursery rhyme, Ring Around the Rosie, around the ring, ring around. As some of you might have heard, there's a theory that Ring Around the Rosie is not just some innocent nursery rhyme, but in fact refers to the bubonic plague during medieval times. And I, even though that's kind of a morbid connotation, I think it's appropriate for this series because I view it very much as a product of our own COVID-19 pandemic. And I say that for a couple of reasons. First, and most obviously, the trip took place in the middle of the pandemic, but I think more importantly, the photo series, in my mind, really reflects the psychological effects of the pandemic. And I think one of the most significant effects of the pandemic is that it's caused many people to reassess their lives, to kind of look at the gerbil wheel they've been on and decide whether or not it's time to get off or at least slow down. And it's my understanding that a lot of people are getting off. And I would say the pandemic definitely caused me to reassess my life in the same way. It triggered some internal change in me, and I really feel like one chapter of my life is beginning to end, and another's just beginning. And, maybe I'm heading more in the direction of Brian, away from that high pressure corporate job. But I feel like it's kind of opened up a new beginning, but it's all still a little bit hazy. And so I think for me, this theme of change and new beginnings is really reflected in the photo series. And that's why I say that the images seem less about the external Icelandic landscapes, stunning as they are, and they really are unbelievably stunning, but really more about my own internal landscape. And I think my artist statement for the series sums it up well, and I'll just read it. It says, the photographs in this series seem to evince a mix of both wonder and apprehension about a new path, changing circumstances, and an unknown future that at the beginning can only be glimpsed hazily. Indeed, there's a mix of both exhilaration and fear as one is suspended between two worlds, wondering what comes next. And because Iceland itself seems suspended between worlds, it was the perfect backdrop for these images. So that's kind of the two meanings of the trip. It's both the beauty of the country, but also this, these kind of internal landscapes. So now I'll focus on a couple of these images, and would love to hear, what folks' reactions to them are and what they conjure for you. But I'll tell you what they kind of conjure for me. So this first image, I think nicely captures the feeling that I was just talking about change and new beginnings. Yep.
I'm so sorry, Scott. Are you sharing? I'm only seeing you.
It says I'm screen sharing.
Yeah.
Can I try it again?
I'm
Can you
seeing
guys
it.
see?
I'm seeing it.
Jonas, can you see? No, we're not. Yeah, just FYI, we can't see.
You can't see it?
Yeah,
No.
we
We see
can.
your picture.
We see it.
I could see it.
See it. Something happened.
I'm seeing them.
Oh, you are? Okay,
I see them.
Yeah.
good, excellent.
Okay. So this first image, I think, captures that whole theme, nicely. I call it peering into the abyss. And it seems to me a perfect metaphor for somebody on the precipice of something new, and trying to peer in and see what's ahead. I also kind of like looking at it as, from a two-dimensional viewpoint. The black marks in the ice, to me, look somewhat like a Rorschach test. And it, says to me that at this point in the journey, the future is kind of ambiguous and unknown, mix of hopes and fears, and it's really, what you see. This is a pretty standard landscape. I gotta say, I've never really considered myself to be a particularly good landscape photographer. My daughter is much better than I am, but I actually like this one a lot. It's very elemental. You got 3 of the 4 elements represented, earth on the right, water on the left, and air in the middle. And again, I think it also nicely illustrates this overall theme of around the ring of being suspended between 2 worlds. And I would say if the previous photograph was peering into the abyss, for me, this photograph is the abyss itself. This photograph depicts one of my favorite parts of Iceland, which is its bath culture. And this is the photograph that was as part of the Lucy Foundation exhibit. Iceland has amazing geothermal activity, and because of that, it's got no shortage of hot water. And because of that, every town, no matter how big or small, really has its own hot bath, where people tend to go after work, congregate, to relax, to socialize. And it really is a part of the culture. There are definitely more upscale touristy hot baths. Blue Lagoon, I think, is the fanciest and most famous. We kind of laughed that it was kind of a Disney version of the hot baths, complete with, requiring you to walk through the gift shop to exit. But despite all of that, I would still highly recommend going there. And then there are these types of natural baths. This, in fact, is a geothermal stream that you can only get to by hiking about an hour and a half up through some pretty rugged mountains. It's very remote. You can see there's a changing station in the back, which isn't really enclosed. So you hike up there, you change into your bathing suit, and you got to be pretty, sure of yourself, and then you jump in. When I was there, the air temperature was about 40 or 50 degrees Fahrenheit, but the water was like a hot tub. It really was marvelous. And again, to me, this photograph, I think, goes well with the theme, because it's such a restful scene. To me, it's really kind of a glimpse of a different life than the typical kind of gerbil wheel life. And this photograph, it's a herd of free-range sheep that we came across on a hike one day. In Iceland, the sheep are everywhere, and they're pretty much allowed to roam as far off as they want. And sometimes they can be hundreds of miles away from the farm that they started at. I added this because something about this free-range arrangement really appealed to me. And then this is another landscape that I really like. It's a famous canyon that I won't try to pronounce on the south side of the island. It was made famous by Justin Bieber, who actually filmed a music video there. To me, this is like curtains parting with just a hazy view of what's on the horizon, and again, kind of goes in with the same theme. And I'll finish with this one. This is a photograph of the rift between the North American and Eurasian tectonic plates. Iceland is so geologically active because it sits right in the middle of the fault line of these two massive plates. And I was really drawn to this scene, I think, not only because of the really otherworldly beauty of it, but because it represents this idea of being suspended between these two worlds, and particularly, focuses on the disruption and the creative energy that's released when those worlds collide. And personally, I feel like I got a little bit of that going on, and am using that creative energy in my photography. So I'll make one last comment. So this is another photograph of that geothermal stream, and you can see the little boy with his feet in the water. He's got the winter hat on and the big sweater, and standing next to the woman in her bikini in the water, and that just gives you a sense of, it was really cold out in the air, but once you were in the water, it was fine. It was wonderful. So that is my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Let me see, I'll stop sharing here.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate the talk and the backstories. I think this is all very cool and interesting. There are a couple of nice comments for you, Scott. You might want to take a look at the chat window there. Scott, just to start off with a couple of question and comment, I see that you chose to use black and white for
Yes.
this series. Just wanted to get your thought on why you chose that.
I didn't really choose it. As I said, I've only started dabbling in color and digital, and these were all taken before I started dabbling.
Oh, I
So
see.
I've always done black and white. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it has the Ansel Adamish look, so it's landscape and but it's on Iceland, so that's pretty cool. All right. And how big are they, Scott? Do you envision when you do print them? I don't know if you actually printed them yet.
I printed some of them. I typically print the square photos 9x9. The image size is 9x9. I, you know, I've started moving more of my process into the digital realm, and I think these actually would look nicer printed bigger. So I'm going to try and print them bigger at some point. But the ones that I printed so far have been, the image size is 9x9.
Yeah, some of them, yeah, might look really cool when they're big because it does sort of translate the grandeur of the image, right? Because it's the landscape is right in front of you. So yeah, cool stuff. Thanks, Scott. Um, all right, let me do a double check on the time. So we're doing quite good on time. Thank you, all three presenters. Appreciate your sharing your work with us. Um, let's see. We do have a couple of questions from before. From Cassandra, you wanted to speak? I had lost that chat window. Something about about the words. Cassandra, you had a question to Brian about that.
Yeah, I was just curious if there were any specific genres of books that you preferred to use when you were finding words for poems, or if you just used whatever books you had available.
When I started, I mean, part of what determines the books I use is the size of the printed page. It needs to be something that I can mostly cover up with a picture. I kind of like it sometimes if there's, maybe a few letters or half a line peeking out, or a chapter heading, or a page number, because that gives you the sense that we're looking at a book page. One of the things that I also found when going through my mother's stuff is I found a stack of books that belonged to my grandmother that date back to the early 1900s. And so a lot of those pieces that you saw in the slideshow are book pages that are over 100 years old. But when I first started doing it, I'll confess that I got on my bike and went around to all the little free libraries in my neighborhood. And and there's a variety of stuff there. There's some YA novels and some, classic novels. The stuff from my grandmother is mostly popular fiction from that period that nobody really remembers anymore. And but I do look for certain things when I'm looking at the pages. I find that pages with a lot of description on them tend to work better than pages with a lot of dialogue. Working with pages with a lot of dialogue really yields a whole different kind of poem, if you will, than working with pages that have a lot of description on them. So, I mean, that's one of the things that I'm looking for. And you can almost see that just by scanning the shapes of the paragraphs. If there's some nice big meaty blocks of paragraphs as opposed to little thin, blocks of dialogue, I'll just do a quick scan of a whole book that way. And then I'll scan the page for interesting nouns usually. Is there a word or something that piques my interest? But the photographs I've been through a number of times. So often I'll have, I'll see something on the page that will trigger a memory of a photograph in that box. Then I'll go through the box trying to find that photograph, and it really kind of goes back and forth. But I'm not looking for books. The source of the pages really isn't, at this point anyway, is not significant to the work itself. I'm not trying to make a statement about the book itself, or or anything like that. When I was in college, I was more interested in doing that. I would, people would come to the door with copies of the Watchtower or Bible tracts, and I'd cut those up and rearrange them into very different things. So when I was doing that work in college, it was very definitely like I was trying to turn around the meaning of the original source materials, but in this case, not so much.
Cool. Brian, John had a question earlier from before. He said that he's interested in the double prints. would you consider stereo poems? That's
You
an interesting
know,
concept.
I hadn't really thought of that. Um, but it's an interesting idea, partly because uh, in the presentation that I've been doing now, I mean, there's a couple of ways I could see going. One would be to repeat the photo on the same page. Right now, I'm using all photos that are portrait orientation, but there's a lot of photos that are landscape orientation that I would like to use, but they don't cover the whole page. And so if I had two of those, then potentially I could put them together and cover the whole page. I hadn't really thought of it. I had thought of, using the same photo for two different poems and then sort of choosing which one is the keeper. But I hadn't thought about, kind of displaying them side by side. That's an interesting idea.
Yeah, that's a good one. One final question, I guess, or for Brian, and then we can move on. A few more for Scott. So, uh, Brian, this is from Nancy K. Have the photos aged or held up well? She's wondering about the archival process and the paper itself. Paper, I mean,
Well,
I think she meant the photo paper. Or both,
mhm.
or both.
The photographs, probably the earliest ones. So most of them are in pretty good condition, and most of the ones I'm using are 4x6, and it was right around 1990 when most of the processing labs switched over and started making the larger prints. And so they're usually in pretty good condition. And my mom kept them in these plastic bins, oftentimes in the original package that she got from the drugstore. Um, so, yeah, the prints themselves are in pretty good shape. Some of the book pages are pretty fragile. And I would say that the um, those works themselves are not archival. None of the source materials are really archival, but I have put them together in a way that I hope will stabilize them to some degree. So I glue the picture onto the page using an archival PVA glue, and then I glue the whole thing onto um, an 1/8 inch piece of Sintra board, because one of the things that I found is that the photographs tend to curl. And I have a bunch of photographs sitting out here on my desk, and I can tell you practically what the humidity is by how much the photographs have curled. And when you um, paste a photograph onto a regular piece of paper, then they kind of curl and stretch at different rates. So I really needed to put them on something that was pretty stable. And the Sintra board being uh, being PVC is really stable, and it works well for that. But that was also part of the reason for mounting them in the shadow box like that, so they would be somewhat protected. But whether or not how they're going to hold up in 100 years, I have no idea.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Hey, Scott. Cassandra asks, did you go to Iceland with the intention of creating a project based on your travels, or did just develop when you were there?
It actually probably developed when I got back. Honestly, I went there with little to no expectations. Actually hadn't picked up my Hasselblad in a couple of years, so I wasn't sure I could even remember how to use it. And I knew that we were probably going to be seeing a lot of landscapes. And as I said, I'd never view myself as a landscape photographer, and I don't think a square format is really the best format for landscapes anyway. So I just went and figured I'd take some pictures, see what I got, and yeah, and it really kind of came together when I got back and pulled them all together.
Yeah, came out really good. And then Paul also asked a next project or a travel destination for you, Scott?
Next destination where I'm going to be bringing my cameras is Ireland. I'm actually working my way through the eyes, and
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah,
yeah.
we'll be interested to check them out when you have them. Okay, and then anything else for Scott? Let me check. Um, all right, and then we got one for Cassandra. What project are you working on next?
Um, I right now I'm kind of between projects. I've been kind of focusing on the job hunt. But I'm back here in my parents' house in my hometown, so I feel like there's definitely some potential photo project here. I've been kind of playing with the idea of photographing all of these places that I remember from high school and seeing how they've changed, and maybe using some text and writing out memories, and something with the hometown for sure, I think will be my next project. I just don't know exactly what it will be yet.
Yeah, it's somewhat organic. Once you jump in it,
Yeah,
it will change, from a little bit from time to time. But Cassandra
exactly.
is willing to do editorial work, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So if
I
you
am
guys
open to
know of
anything.
anything, send it her way.
Yes,
All
that would
right.
be greatly appreciated.
Of course, of course.
What is your hometown?
I'm in Bonnie Lake, Washington, but I'm open to anywhere in Seattle, Portland, Oregon as well. I would eventually like to get to the East Coast, but need to save up some money first. So mainly in the Pacific Northwest is right now where I'm looking for jobs.
Good luck.
Cool. Very cool. Um, I don't I don't see any other questions or comments unless journalists you see some that I missed. But folks, if you have other, you just go ahead and unmute yourself if you like to make a comment or speak to your friends or family members or whatever. So we're almost at the end of the presentation. It's scheduled for 7:30 Pacific time, but feel free to stick around and chat with others if you like. So yeah, if you want to unmute and make comments or ask questions, feel free.
Brian,
Yes.
you mentioned that you didn't think that your creations, your art might last, but have you thought of scanning them?
Oh, I scan them. Yeah, definitely.
Oh, you scan.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think they'd be great in a book so that they could really be easily read.
Right. All of them have been scanned, high resolution scans. So, one of my hopes is that I can put them in a book, but also having scanned them, I can also do limited edition prints.
Right,
So,
nice.
but I expect, I mean, the books that I'm tearing up are already 100 years old. It wouldn't surprise me if, some of these last another 50 years or so, if, they're kept out of the sun and taken care of.
Right.
Yeah.
So are you opposed to using a new book? They have to be old books?
Um, I'm not opposed to using a new book. Early on, I used some newer books, but for some reason, the color of the yellowed paper just really appeals to me more so than the bright white of the newer books. I actually have some books that are water damaged and have stains and so on some of the pages, and there's just something I really like about that character.
Yeah,
Well, it
I
goes
think.
with the era of the photos.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that. Yeah, I think the old ancient, like book pages sort of match with the ancient photographs,
Yeah, subject
and it
matter.
sort of,
Mhm.
yeah, sort of have to, yeah, have that aged look. So I think you picked the right one. But Brian, you can also try it, see if you like it. Probably, we'll see. Yeah, I mean, you can do anything really.
Yeah. I've actually got some old books that have etchings or book or illustrations in them, and I've been toying around with the idea of cutting out pieces of the photographs to reveal parts of the illustration. So they aren't poems, they're all image, but they're composed of part of the image from the book and part of the image from the photograph.
Right. Cool. Very cool. Great. Now that we got some extra time, Cassandra, I didn't know this before when we, selected Jonas and I didn't know that you work with Aline
Yes,
Smithson.
I do.
Yeah, yeah.
So I've been interning at Lens
We
Scratch for
we
about 4 months.
we know her well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Many years. Many years. She's great.
Oh, yes. I really enjoy working with her. It's been a blessing to have this internship and have it virtually. It's been really nice as well.
Right. Yeah, I did not know that until I saw your
Yes.
somewhere. I go, oh, Aline, I know that. I did.
Yes.
Oh well, small world, as they say.
Oh, yes.
Cassandra, do you work on those online exhibits that she does? You'd send in one photo and
Yeah.
anybody gets in. You work on those?
Yeah. We're actually doing, I think the student prize is happening right now. So I am kind of taking a little bit of that on, and I format a lot of the articles that go on the website and everything. So yes, it's been really, really great to see all of these different artists daily that I've never been exposed to. So that's been really awesome as well, to get exposed to new artists and new photographers as well.
Yeah, for those of you who I mean, most of us here probably know um, linscratch.com.
Yep.
Amazing photography resources that you
Well,
should
I
look
I
at.
built the site, so I know it. So
Jonas, I know we not, we don't want to give you credit for that. Well, he did the site originally, right? So that's why Kendra, we know Aline really well, like 10 years.
Yes.
Wow, I don't know, a long time.
Wow.
and
When I was a child.
Brian's on the team too. So
And yeah,
Mhm.
that's I didn't know about that until recently. Like yesterday, was looking at your thing. I go, all of a sudden, today is like a lens scratch day,
Yep.
which I had no idea until like yesterday.
Well, Aline is definitely a big presence in the LA photo community. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, she's just everywhere though,
Hmm.
She's everywhere. Anyway, that's good. That's great. And Nancy, thank you for all your comments. These are very, yeah, Nancy, thank you.
well, there was one more question from Paul asking Cassandra or Scott if they're working on print projects.
Oh yeah,
Can-
from Paul. Working on
Ah.
print projects.
Yeah, I'm actually working on a book right now. trying to put something together from another photo project that it's an older photo project called Domesticated Animals. It's kind of more along the lines of what I usually do, which is it's a lot of people, kind of street photography, kind of a vibe. But that's kind of my next big project that I'm working on. I'd really love to get that put together and out there.
Do you plan to sell or independently published, or you're gonna find a publisher?
I have no idea.
No idea.
Whatever I can get. Yeah,
Okay, I hear you.
yeah.
I wasn't planning. I haven't planned any print projects. It may be something I do in the future, but at this moment, that's not where I'm at. I just feel like the work that I've been working on is more suited for like a gallery setting rather than being seen in a book, just because it's more three-dimensional. And there's just, I feel like it works better when you see it in person. But I definitely think that doing something in print could be something I do in the future.
Okay, that's great. I wanted to thank everyone for spending your evening with us, and also I love one thing I love about Open Show LA is that we see all kinds of genre, all kinds of applications of photography, which is really eye-opening for me and for everybody else. So thank you all for being here.
Well, thank you, Richard and Jonas, for taking the time and effort to put this together. I know it's not, it does take time and effort, and thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, it's at first it was more work, but we got it down to a science, sort of a science. But we might have one in May, so watch for announcements.
Okay.
And the next one might be a special one, so I won't share too much right now, but might be sometime in May, maybe in June. So we'll publish it in Facebook and on our website. Oh, if you're not already on our mailing list, please do add yourself so that when we do a call for open calls, you can get that, and then you can attend our next open show to hear others talk about their work. Okay, thank you all for joining. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Richard.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank
Brian and
you.
Cassandra, really
Thank you.
wonderful.
We'll stay in touch. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Take care.